I now have the pleasure of introducing our last lecture speaker, Professor Wendy Muchman.
I just said to Professor DeSanto, do you still get nervous? And he said, always. So just so you know, you guys, it doesn't go away. Thank you, Dean Osofsky, for that beautiful introduction, and Sam and Maddie, who it was my honor to have in my class. Thank you, students, for inspiring me every day and for selecting me for this great honor, the talk to celebrate your impending graduation, the culmination of your blood, sweat, and tears over the last 3 years. You are my inspiration every day. In so many ways, life is like a book. How the light in our book shines depends on our individual actions, how we write the chapters. Graduation is the end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. It is the beginning of your entry into the noble practice of law. And make no mistake about it, it is a noble profession. Democracies depend upon an independent legal profession as an important force in preserving government under the law. As Justice Ginsburg said, I tell law students, if you are going to be a lawyer and just practice your skill, you have a skill like a plumber. But if you want to be a professional, you will have to do something outside yourself. All of you have the skills, intellect, and courage to be true professionals, and how you will use your voices to write the next chapters in your life matters. So I will proceed as follows. It's like a class, about 40 minutes, give or take a few. I never keep you too long. I know that's the first rule of being a good teacher. But I will discuss first the rule of law and its current threats. I will discuss how some lawyers, law firms, and judges have used their voices to protect the rule of law. I will discuss the voice and power of individual responsibility as modeled by my mom and those who saved her life during the Holocaust. I will discuss the voices of lawyer heroes on whose shoulders we all stand, and then I will discuss or share with you your own ideas that we shared this and last semester about what we can do to protect the rule of law. In 2017, Tim Snyder, an American historian, wrote a book called On Tyranny. My mom read the book and gave it to me that year. Reviewers describe it as a call to arms, to resistance. I read the book in 2017 with great interest, but I thought my mom was perhaps overreacting given her background as a Holocaust survivor. Unfortunately, in the way moms often do, she was right. She saw the signs then, even as did historian Tim Snyder. Snyder noted when political leaders set a negative example, the work of lawyers is needed to protect the rule of law. We discussed that concept in our professional responsibility classes, how it is impossible to subvert the rule of law without the help of lawyers. So what is the rule of law? A simple definition is it is when public processes of official review and accountability are used so law-based reasons for official action can be demanded. Unfortunately, as we also discuss in our professional responsibility classes, lawyer skills can be used for good or for evil. You can see up here a few unfortunate examples of evil. Lawyers wrote the Jim Crow laws. They wrote the Final Solution in World War II. They wrote the Chinese Exclusion Act. They enacted the law that made it a crime to avoid President Roosevelt's executive order evacuating the Japanese during World War II. And a blot on the stain of the history of this democracy was the United States Supreme Court majority opinion upholding the executive order, saying it was an appropriate measure in light of national security required after the attack on Pearl Harbor. History has not been kind to that majority opinion, nor should it have been. So what I ask you to remember as you sit here today is with great power comes great responsibility. Be vigilant about the use of your legal skills. Our democracy will be entrusted to you. And as Dean Osofsky just said, we have great hope in you for our future. So going back to the On Tyranny book, it has a chapter that I love called Remember Professional Ethics. And this is a little bit of what he says. Professions can create forms of ethical conversation that are impossible between a lonely individual and a distant government. If members of professions think of themselves as groups with common interests, with norms at all times, then they can gain a kind of confidence and indeed a certain kind of power. Professional ethics must guide us precisely when the situation is exceptional, because then there is no such thing as just following orders. Another book in a similar vein, written in 2018, How Democracies Die, also written by two historians, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Zyblatt. In 2018, when the book was written, the authors asked one question, one they said they never thought they'd have to ask about this country. The question was, is our democracy in grave danger? It is of grave concern that 7 years later, just last week, they published this guest essay in the New York Times. How will we know when we have lost our democracy? We can tell, they wrote, by the cost of opposing government. In democracies, citizens are not punished for opposing those in power. They need not worry about peacefully publishing critical opinions, supporting opposition candidates, or engaging in peaceful protest, because they know in a democracy they will not suffer retribution from the government. In fact, the idea of legitimate opposition, that citizens have a right to criticize, to organize opposition to, and to seek to remove the government through elections, that is a foundational principle of democracy. Their editorial continued, under authoritarianism, by contrast, opposition comes with a price. Citizens and organizations that run afoul of the government become targets of punitive measures. When citizens must think twice about criticizing or opposing the government, they said, because they could credibly face government retribution, they no longer live in a full democracy. By that measure, they wrote, America has crossed the line into a competitive authoritarianism. So assuming that is true, and there is now a price to pay for criticizing our government, what will you do? Will your voice be silent? Will your chapter's plot never be written? Having had the honor and privilege of being part of your law school career, I am certain that the resounding answer to that question is no. You will each find your own way to make an impact. It doesn't necessarily have to be leaving your job because your firm did something you don't like, but it does have to be do something. You will all need to find your line in the sand. And if you pay attention, you will know where it is. So let's look now at some lawyers that have raised their voices in the past months and how they have made their voices heard during these frightening times. Just a couple weeks ago, on May 1, lawyers across this country protested the current attacks on democracy. This year, they called Law Day a day to reiterate the oath, of lawyers as guardians of our democracy and the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. David Latt, who's one of the writers for Above the Law, published these pictures and said, "I've never seen a protest with this many people in suits," because it was all lawyers coming from their offices. So what is the oath they were talking about? Soon enough, you will take the bar exam, you will pass the bar exam, and you will raise your hand and swear to the oath of office in the state where you will practice law. Even ChatGPT correctly understands what the oath of office is, and it described it as a lawyer's oath of office is a formal pledge being made upon being admitted to the practice of law. It outlines your ethical obligations and your promises to uphold the law and the legal system. It is a key part of the admission process and reinforces the lawyer's commitment to ethical conduct. Okay, I admit I took this definition straight from ChatGPT, but you guys, I knew it was right, okay? Generally described, the oaths of office are administered by a justice in the state of your Supreme Court and require that you pledge to uphold the law, support the Constitution, federal and state. And believe it or not, the oaths of office emphasize the very things we discuss all semester in our professional responsibility class. Give or take, they include the following language: swearing or affirming to adhere to the rules of professional conduct, not filing an action that lacks reasonable basis in law or fact, upholding the obligations of confidentiality to your clients, being candid, fair, and courteous to judges, opposing counsel, and third persons, striving to be worthy of trust and respect, and represent the legal profession as one of justice, honor, civility, and service, and practicing law, always considering a lawyer's obligations to the defenseless and oppressed. Your training at Northwestern, this elite law school, required intellectual rigor, courage, and dedication to the pursuit. You are ready to enter this honorable profession regardless of your current jitters. Now, there's something else that reminds you of the obligations that you take on as a lawyer and the critical role in protection of our society, and that is the preamble. So for anyone, just a reminder, the preamble is the introductory part of a statute that sets forth its purpose or goals or the intention behind the main content. And you all know how I loved the preamble, and its words maybe never ring truer. So in the first part of the preamble, it tells you a lawyer, as a member of the legal profession, is a representative of clients, an officer of the legal system, and a public citizen having a special responsibility for the quality of justice. And then it ends by reminding you that lawyers play a vital role in the preservation of society. Right? So in addition to the voices of the lawyers on Law Day, we heard some other voices of lawyers this semester. It does seem long ago, and I can go on a little, that given the rapid onslaught of everything we have suffered since January of 2025, but if you think back to mid-February 2025, we heard the voices of two Department of Justice prosecutors, Danielle Sassoon and Hagen Scotton, who rather than dismiss the federal corruption charges against New York City's mayors, Eric Adams, they resigned. Had they not spoken publicly, perhaps no one would have known about the Justice Department's misguided decision in that case. And as you will see, their voices gave courage to others to follow their lead. Their decisions were not partisan, in spite of attempts to make them look partisan, as both lawyers have long connections to conservative ideals. Danielle Sassoon had clerked for the Honorable J. Harvey Wilkinson on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and Justice Anton Scalia, and she is a member of the Federalist Society. When she resigned, aside from the fact that I made you all look at that letter because she talked about all the violations of professional responsibility rules that were occurring by her filing the motion to dismiss the criminal charges, she also talked about those judges who had guided her early in her career. And she said, "Both men instilled in me a sense of duty to contribute to the public good, to uphold the rule of law, and a commitment to reasoned and thorough analysis. I have always considered it my obligation to pursue justice impartially," she said, "without favor to the wealthy or those who occupy an important public office, or harsher treatment for the less powerful." Likewise, Hagen Scotton received his JD from Harvard. He was a U.S. Army Special Forces officer who served 3 combat tours in Iraq and earned 2 Bronze Stars. He clerked for Justice Brett Kavanaugh while he was on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C., and he also clerked for John Roberts. Hagen Scotton's email is truly remarkable, and it will go down in history. He said, "There is a tradition in public service of resigning in a last-ditch effort to head off a serious mistake. Some will view the mistake you are committing here in light of their generally negative views of the administration. I do not share those views," he said. "I can even understand how a chief executive whose background is in business and politics might see the contemplated dismissal with leverage as a good, if tasteful, deal." But pay attention, because he goes on. "But any U.S. attorney would know that our laws and traditions do not allow us to use the prosecutorial power to influence other citizens, much less elected officials, in this way. If no lawyer within earshot of the president is willing to give him that advice, then I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion. But it was never going to be me. Please consider this my resignation. It has been an honor to serve as a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York." Signed, Hagen Scotton. And after they resigned, what happened? Their superiors in the Justice Department referred them for internal investigations. But after Sassoon and Scotton publicly voiced their concerns, more Justice Department lawyers resigned, including the then acting head of the Department of Justice Criminal Division, and 3 Department of Justice lawyers from the Public Integrity Section. They resigned rather than take part in the dismissal of what they considered valid criminal charges. And then 3 more Justice Department lawyers, Assistant United States Attorneys from the Southern District of New York, Celia Cohn, Andrew Rohrbeck, and Derek Wilkstrom were suspended when they refused to participate in the Justice Department's move to drop the charges. First, those 3 lawyers were placed on administrative leave, and one of the conditions of their returning to office was that they express regret and admit some wrongdoing in connection with their refusal to move to dismiss the case. And they refused to do so. They later resigned from their positions, and they said, "We will not confess wrongdoing when there was none. The Justice Department has decided that obedience supersedes all else, requiring us to abdicate our legal and ethical obligations in favor of directions from Washington." Serving in the Southern District of New York has been an honor. There is no greater privilege than to work for an institution whose mandate is to do the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons. We will not abandon those principles to keep our job, and they resigned. Consider yet another public voice. DOJ lawyer Erez Rivuni, who was representing the government in a district court proceeding about the removal of Abrego Garcia, originally from El Salvador, living in the United States, from the United States to El Salvador. He told the court on the eve of one of the hearings that he had raised questions with US officials about why they couldn't bring Garcia back, but he had received no satisfactory answer. He acknowledged an absence of evidence supporting that deportation. He asked the court to please give his client, the government, one more chance to show deportation was permissible. As noted in the piece on the slide that you're not looking at, but I know what it says, from the Wall Street Journal, they said Rivuni brought candor to the courts under both Democratic and Republican administrations. And for this conduct, in telling the truth to a court, right? Candor to the tribunal trumps all. He was suspended for failure to follow a directive from his superiors. Yet, he followed his ethical obligations and added his voice to that of history. And then let's think back to other voices that we have heard. And let's think about the executive orders relating to law firms. The executive orders sought to ban the firms and their employees who had taken positions unfavorable to the president from federal offices, federal courthouse, including restricting their access to government buildings, barring future government employment, and potentially canceling government contracts or prohibiting companies using their firms from receiving contracts. The language specifically referred to Wilmer Hale for rehiring Robert Mueller after he served as special counsel on the investigation of the allegations of Russian interference with the 2016 election, often referred to by the administration as the Russia hoax or the phony witch hunt. And then there was a bizarre claim that Jenner and Block supports attacks against women and children and refused to accept biological realities of sex, and also that that firm should not be allowed access to government buildings because they were thrilled to rehire Andrew Weissman, who was part of Mueller's entirely unjustified investigation. So where are we on those? In the 4 lawsuits filed by 4 different law firms, pending in front of 4 different judges, every judge has already temporarily or permanently enjoined enforcement of those orders. The framers of our Constitution would see this as a shocking abuse of power, District Court Judge Lauren Ali Khan said as she entered a temporary restraining order on behalf of the Sussman firm. And Sussman, by the way, represented Dominion, who won a $787 billion settlement from Fox News. She said that it likely violates the First and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution, noting that the government cannot hold lawyers hostage to force them to agree with it, allowing the government to coerce private businesses, law firms, and lawyers solely on the basis of the fact that their view is antithetical to the government. That is not what our constitutional republic requires. She said, frankly, these executive orders are based on a personal vendetta, and I think the framers of our Constitution would find them shocking. Another judge, when asking one of the lawyers about, well, are you telling me that these executive orders aren't punitive? And the Justice Department lawyer tried to argue that they were not. The judge said, really? Like incredulously. And then when one of the Justice Department lawyers tried to argue that Jenner and Block engaged in discrimination, the judge actually said, give me a break. In granting the preliminary injunction in the Perkins-Coie case, Judge Beryl Howell said, this may be amusing in Alice in Wonderland, where the Queen of Hearts yells off with their heads to annoying subjects, but this cannot be the reality we are living under. On May 2nd, in the same case, Judge Howell granted the firm's summary judgment motion and permanently blocked enforcement of the EO. The language of her order included the importance of independent lawyers to ensuring the American judicial system's fair and impartial administration of justice has been recognized in this country since our founding era. Absent their crucial independence, lawyers would become nothing more than parrots of the views of whatever group wields the power at the moment. The executive order takes the approach, let's kill all the lawyers I don't like, sending a clear message, lawyers stick to the party line or else. And then she also went out of her way to thank Williams and Conley for their role in defending the Perkins firm, noting that when this chapter of history is written, history will look kindly at the firm for stepping up to the plate to undertake the representation. It is frightening to note how quickly the rule of law has been attacked in this country since January 2025. In a recent interview in the New York Times, Isabel Allende spoke of her beloved Chile. She noted that although things happened very quickly in Chile, we only knew the consequences slowly because they don't always affect you personally immediately. And you think, well, I can live with this, until one day it hits you personally and you realize you can't. And she talked about how fear is a very pervasive thing that changes society, changes the way people behave with each other, and changes you inside. Yet, we do not have to be paralyzed. We have seen those with the courage to resist and fight back in some way and hope that they will help rewrite our path back to democracy. So am I here to depress you on the eve of your singular accomplishment? I am certainly not. I am not. And I would ask for you to allow me to give you some hope about the power of individual responsibility, meaning you can do something. You cannot do nothing. You must do something, but the power of individual responsibility is strong. And as those of you who took my class may remember, that message of the power of individual responsibility comes from the person who is the reason I am standing up in front of you today, my mom. Many of you know that she passed away on April 28th, and I am ever so grateful to the love that you have extended to me in your cards and your notes and your posts. I am truly grateful. I stand here well aware that some of you have suffered similar losses in the last year and the last semester at your young ages. And I have watched you proceed with resilience, with courage, and it has touched me deeply. I think of all of you in particular at this time. So a few lessons that I'd like to share from my mom: the power of individual responsibility, the power of resilience, and the fact that our lives are like a book with many chapters still unwritten. My mom was honored by the United States Holocaust Museum in September 2024 for her work speaking to remember the lessons of the Holocaust, but more importantly, to combat hate of all kinds. In a video recording that she made at that time, she said, "Even in the darkness, we must look for hope, and no truer words have ever been spoken." My mom was born to Julius and Meta Westheimer in Berlin, Germany in 1933. Her birth name was Beatrix Westheimer. Her native language was German. She was a truly loved only child. Unfortunately, she was born the same year as the Nazis' rise to power, and she often talked about remembering sitting on her father's shoulders during the pogrom known as Kristallnacht. That pogrom was called Kristallnacht because of the broken glass that littered the streets of Berlin after Jewish-owned stores, buildings, and synagogues were smashed. Her family fled to Belgium on foot. She remembered being scared, jumping into ditches on the way, and being told to be quiet as they heard dogs barking. In Belgium, where she had another chapter of her life, she learned to speak French. After her family was denied a visa to go to America, as some other family members successfully did, her parents, Julius and Meta Westheimer, made the ultimate sacrifice of love, sending my mom and her cousin Henri to two Catholic French women living in a Belgian village called Ottigny, and her name was changed to match her new identity to Beatrice Duché. Is that okay? In that small Catholic village in Ottigny, Belgium, 150 villagers saved 40 Jewish children for no money, no rewards, no anything other than it was the right thing to do. After all, if any of them were caught, they would have been killed too. My mom and her cousin attended church, and they fell in love with their new religion with a passion. My mom told the priest, pictured here, that's my mom, Beatrice, and her cousin Henri, Father Vas, that she wanted to be a Carmelite nun of the non-speaking order. That never would have worked. And her cousin Henry wanted to join the priesthood. Before the war ended, my biological grandparents, Julius and Meta Westheimer, were killed in another story of remarkable courage. One of the few organized resistance attempts to stop a train headed for the concentration camp, 3 young Belgian men resisted the forces of evil with their bicycles, a red hurricane lamp, and a pistol. The young men rode their bikes to the tracks where the 20th transport was on the way to Auschwitz on April 19, 1943. They placed the red lantern on the tracks. It was a recognized sign to stop the train, and the train stopped. They intended to shoot the driver of the train with the pistol, but someone had alerted the Nazis. On the 20th transport were about 1,640 prisoners on their way to Auschwitz, but 236 managed to jump. Of those 236, 26 of them were shot and immediately killed, including my mom's father, Julius. 92 escapees were immediately recaptured and placed back on the train to Auschwitz, including my mom's mother, Meta. but 118 people managed to escape, including several young children who lived long lives. All thanks to these 3 rescuers who have been honored in the city of Brussels. Those are their names. And then returning to the wonderful Father Voss, at the end of the war, he did refuse my mom's heartfelt desire to become a Catholic nun. He told her that she had to go back to her Jewish family because they had died for her religion. So my mom, and therefore I, owe our lives to those 2 brave women, the 150 villagers in that town, and Father Voss, who somehow managed to save 40 Jewish souls during that war. Some of them are now remembered and honored in the museum in Israel, as well as in the town of Otini, and the museum in Israel, which is Yad Vashem. So my mom's chapters continued when she came to this country. She reinvented herself yet again and learned English. Many of you have heard her speak. Unlike me, she spoke 3 languages with no accent. My mom was an immigrant. Changing her name again to Beatrice Louis, and her nickname was Trixie, when she was adopted by her maternal aunt and uncle, who became the only grandparents I ever knew on my mom's side. Trixie went to college, married my dad, became Trixie Muchman, lost her only son, my only brother, and we found, after her father died, these family letters. And she wrote a book that you see her reading from there. And she often spoke, not just about the Holocaust, but about the importance of combating hate of any kind, and the importance of never being a bystander. When she was pretty young, my dad died. She remarried her second husband, Larry Abrams, and changed her name again. So you can see my mom's book had many chapters. Everything you do matters. The message to you, the power of individual responsibility, burns bright. You might not be able to change the world, but you can do something. You understand now why I cannot be silent at this crucial time in our history about the importance of how you use the great powers and your responsibilities as you move forward. So let's look back on some of our other heroes. And I know some of you have faculty heroes, and some of you have heroes who are your family or your friend and your mentors. Every spring semester, I teach a class with Mary Foster, and we look back on some of our legal heroes. All of our legal heroes are required to be people that faced some sort of hardship and discrimination, and then even so, left an enduring positive influence on our society. Patsy Mink, the first woman of color to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, the first Asian American woman to serve in Congress, in addition to doing things like writing Title IX, the Early Childhood Education Act, and the Women's Educational Equity Act. She was the first Asian American woman to run for president. Her quote says, and I love this quote, "It is easy enough to vote right and be consistently with the majority. But it is more often more important to be ahead of the majority, and this means being willing to cut the first furrow in the ground and stand alone for a while if necessary." Louis Brandeis, the son of Jewish immigrants, the first Jewish lawyer to serve on the Supreme Court. Brandeis University describes him as a towering legal and judicial figure. And he was instrumental in shaping American jurisprudence. He says most of the things worth doing in the world had been declared impossible before they were done. And then Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina and only the third woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Sotomayor was born in New York City to Puerto Rican parents. She grew up in a housing project in the Bronx. She, as a Supreme Court justice, has authored many important opinions, both majority and dissent, and she has this to say about failure, because we will all fail as we write our chapters, right? But what she says is, failure hurts. Any kind of failure stings. If you live in the sting, you will undoubtedly fail. My way of getting past the sting is to say, no, I'm not going to let this get me down. And then the great Maya Angelou, it is important to remember and celebrate our heroes and sheroes. So I took some slides from this semester from the heroes that you picked this semester. And I only have time to talk about a few, but again, Constance Baker Motley, who worked with Martin Luther King on the civil rights movement and became the first African-American woman in the state Senate and was later appointed to the Southern District of New York as a judge. Asma Jahangir, whose career was utterly remarkable, not only because of the time period in which she was a woman lawyer in Pakistan, but because she established groundbreaking initiatives that redefined the Pakistan legal landscape, as well as championed human rights, and she left a lasting mark on the global human rights movement. Robert Billet, he could have been just another insurance defense lawyer. Instead, he spent decades of his career successfully fighting DuPont and helping us to understand the danger of forever chemicals on our health and environment. Telford Taylor, a military intelligence officer who was a prosecutor in Nuremberg, as well as a vocal opponent of one of the most dangerous people, at least for a certain time in our history, and that would be Joseph McCarthy. And then Justice Jackson, who left the court to prosecute the Nuremberg trials, as well as wrote the very famous dissent in the Korematsu case, where he basically said that what the court had done was legalize racism. He said, Fred Korematsu, who was an American citizen of Japanese descent, was born on our soil to parents born in Japan. The Constitution makes him a citizen of the United States by nativity and a citizen of California by residence. No claim is made that he is not loyal to this country. There is no suggestion that apart from the matter involved here, he is not law-abiding and well-disposed. Korematsu, however, has been convicted of something not ordinarily thought a crime. It consists merely of being present in the state where he was born, whereof he is a citizen, and where all his life he has lived. As a student wrote this semester, not only was this dissent significant in the sense of morality, but it also showed that Justice Jackson was a man of great principle because he went against his friend, President Roosevelt, who had appointed him and nominated him to the court in writing that dissent. We can only hope that this commitment to justice and indifference to political pressure will be noted by the current judges. So while we don't know what the future will hold, we are in charge of how we respond to it, how we exercise our voices to defend democracy and the rule of law. And here are some thoughts which you brought to us this semester. Whether it is talking to grammar school civic classes about how a democracy really works, whether it is working for a climate change organization, for an organization pursuing LGBTQ rights or civil rights of any kind, it is important to build bridges, open conversations, especially with people with whom you disagree. Whether you are a cause lawyer, a public interest lawyer, or a big law lawyer, use your unique skills for the better good. You always have brilliant ideas. And never forget to enjoy the small stuff along the way. We know you can do it. Thank you again for this great honor. Please keep in touch with all of us. We are here for you. Congratulations to you and your families. Class of 2025, you did it.